What is a blue zone? A blue zone is an area in the world where there are a ton of centennials, people that are living 100 years or longer. These are the areas in the world where we have the oldest people. This is in like places like Icaria, Greece, Okinawa, Japan, Sardinia, Italy, Koya, Costa Rica, and Loma Linda, California are some of the big blue zone areas. Today, we're going to talk about why they're living so long. The number one food that I wanted to talk about today that is what people in the blue zone regions eat is they eat a lot of leafy greens. So spinach, kale, collard greens, chard, the top of the radishes, they eat a lot of that. So these are extremely healthy, nutrient-packed foods that are low in calories, tons of nutrients in there, a lot of anti-cancer constituents in there, tons of fiber. So it makes a lot of sense why they're living longer just for that reason, because they're eating a lot of these foods. So number two, and this is a really cool one too, is they eat a lot of locally grown fruits and vegetables. So the key here is local. So many of them have their own gardens, and many times they have community gardens where they get their food. So it's grown right there and it's able to ripen on the vine. And when that happens, it's able to get a lot more nutrients in there. So the food that we get a lot of times is picked early, like a tomato, it's picked green, and then it's put on like a boat or it's put on a ship or it's put on a truck or whatever. And then it sits in the store for a while and ripens till it's green. That's not having its full nutrient profile to it. So they are actually eating a lot of locally raised grown food and they're not eating a lot of processed foods also. So they're eating a lot of those fruits, vegetables in the good, healthy form. And obviously, we've heard a lot. You need to eat a lot of fruits and vegetables. They're eating a lot of that, and they're eating it local. So they're getting a lot more nutrients than we are normally if we're not eating locally grown fruits and vegetables. Number three is they eat a lot of beans. So they are plant based. They are 95% plant based. And where are they getting a lot of the protein is coming from beans. So why are beans so healthy? For one, is they're not eating a lot of meat and they're getting their protein from beans. That's a good benefit. But also, it's high in the protein, it's high in fiber, it's also high in B vitamins, zinc, calcium, and potassium. A lot of these nutrients I talked about are actually really high in meat. So we're able to get a lot of the goodies that come from meat without some of the mal effects that can happen from meat. That's what's great about beans, especially like the zinc. You get a lot of that from meat, but you get a lot of that in the beans too. B vitamins, not B12 though. We do need to eat a little bit of meat, and the people in the blue zone do eat some meat, just not a lot. And that brings me into number four. So they eat meat sparingly, very small amount of meat. Like I said, 95% of their diet is plant based. So meat is more like a side dish. It's not a main dish when they eat it. They do tend to eat a lot more fish. They eat fish 1 to 3 times per week, depending on the region, but they are only eating 3 ounces of less of fish, which is a small little portion of fish there. And they do eat other meats sometimes, but they're going to eat that maximum 5 times a month. And they're eating very small amounts of that type of meat. It could be pork, beef, chicken. And usually this is locally raised food also in that region. They're not usually getting it from other areas. What's so bad about meat? I'm not an anti-meat guy. We just need to not eat as much as we usually are of meat. We need to eat it sparingly because it does tend to be high in insulin growth factor, which helps us build big muscles, but it can promote cancer growth and lead to other diseases like cardiovascular diseases. Also really high in saturated fats, not high in the omega-9 fatty acids, except if you're doing it grass-fed. So that's probably a big reason why they're living longer is they're not eating a ton of meat that possibly could be detrimental to our health if we eat a lot of it. Number five reason is that they eat a lot of fermented foods. So we've heard a lot about fermented foods and they eat a lot of them. So this is how they actually store their food for long periods of time is they ferment it. They don't do a lot of canning at all. They either ferment or they dry their food. So fermenting examples is maybe they're fermenting radishes or carrots or green beans, cabbage, all these things. They all taste great. You even can ferment blueberries. I had that in Maine recently. Awesome. Really tastes really great. So there's a lot of awesome foods that you can ferment that taste great. And you're getting all the benefits that happen from the probiotics and prebiotics that you get from these fermented foods. And what's so great about drying their food instead of canning the food? Drying their food, they're able to let it ripen on the vine. and then they dry it really quick. They either use old school practices or maybe I don't know what they're doing now. Maybe they're doing the drying machines that we have that are really fancy that even work even better because they don't have to sit out in the sun and sit there for a long period of time and dry. But this is able to maintain its nutrient value much better than canning. So what's the problem with canning? Canning, first off, they add a ton of sugar or they add a lot of salt to be able to can food. Secondary, they heat it at high temperatures for a while and you're killing all the nutrients. So when you're canning a food, you're not getting a ton of nutrients from the food. You might be getting the calories, but not getting a ton of nutrients. How they actually preserve the food is a lot smarter than most of us. Yeah. So how long do fermented foods last? They can last a really long time, 1 or 2 years, maybe even longer, depending on the food and how it's done. But yeah, if you ferment it appropriately, it can last for a really long time. Not quite as long as canning. Usually people eat their food during the winter and they're eating all that during that winter time and then they're replenishing it again with their gardens. So what did the blueberries I had in Maine tasted like? It tasted slightly vinegary and sweet. It was a great combo. It was like a sweet and sour was what it was with a blueberry sweet and sour. It was awesome on a salad. It was great. So all we need is actually follow a good diet like I talked about? No, there's a lot more that they're doing in the Blue Zones area than just following this diet, and probably maybe just as important, maybe even more important things to do than just following this diet. So, if you wanna learn more about that, you got to listen to our next video where we're gonna be talking about different lifestyle habits that you follow to be able to live longer. If you wanna learn more about Blue Zone diet and how to live longer, click on some of the videos that we have to the right. I'm Dr. Jake, and I'll see you there.